One of the most overlooked questions when it comes to taking methylene blue has nothing to do with energy, focus, or even brain health. It has to do with the gut microbiome. Because anytime you're working with something that demonstrates antimicrobial properties, there's always a second layer to consider. Not just what benefits it may bring, but also what else it might be shifting behind the scenes. I'm Dr. Kenny, an IFM certified functional medicine practitioner. And one of the things I pay attention to most in holistic healing is how interventions in one system can quietly influence the other until it's not so quiet. So what I want to do here is zoom in on that specific question. What do we currently understand about how methylene blue interacts with the gut microbiome and how to think about that without oversimplifying it and allowing it the space to breathe? If you've been following along with this methylene blue series, you know that methylene blue interacts with mitochondrial function. It can support electron transport, which ultimately creates our energy. But it's mostly used as an efficiency tool, not something that just powers through the chemistry and other roadblocks. At the right dose, in the right context, it can help the system run more efficiently. But this is a part that rarely gets the same attention because we're so focused on the benefits and the black and white thinking. It was originally used to treat malaria, in fact. That antimicrobial profile is part of why we need to talk about its effects in the gut. Because when you take something that has this broad spectrum killing property, it doesn't just go straight to your mitochondria. It transits the entire digestive tract and interacts there first. And along the way, it's interacting with these species in your gut, both good and bad. This isn't necessarily a reason to panic or anything like that. I want to be clear, but it is a reason to think more carefully than most people are thinking about these kinds of supplements right now. The gut microbiome isn't just a collection of bacteria. There's also fungi and viruses and protozoa involved. It's also a communication network. It talks to our own immune systems and our nervous systems, and it talks directly to the brain in a two-way street via the vagus nerve. It's also a huge hub and center for anti-inflammatory and immune function throughout the whole body. When you shift that environment in a big way, you're not just changing what happens in the gut itself, you're shifting all of its downstream functions as well. And that's where this conversation deserves a little of the air. Let's get clear what we mean by general antimicrobial properties too. A recent comprehensive review from a study in 2021 documented methylene blue's broad pharmacological profile. It demonstrated that this compound has multiple effects against microorganisms, including bacteria, viruses, and protozoan or parasites. And that's not a side effect, that is a core feature of how methylene blue actually functions. That antimicrobial piece and side effects in general are often treated as footnotes in the society, something to be aware of, but not something to fully consider when making these decisions. In good functional medicine, that's not how we evaluate interventions. So the question does turn to how is the individual's microbiome functioning currently before we intervene? It's central to the conversation. And to be clear, this isn't about methylene blue necessarily destroying your gut health and your microbiome. The dose matters enormously, which we covered in part 3. And the mechanism is real, however, so it is important to consider in each individual case. We also might look at other things like antioxidant capacity, because driving more energy production creates more oxidative stress indirectly as well. And by the way, if you're one who likes the research, I've included a free research summary that includes a short breakdown of each, as well as the references for you to check out. It's in the pinned comment and the description below. Here's where the research starts to get a little more interesting and to the human study level. And this is where nuance matters a lot as well. A recent study in 2021 looked at 3 different compounds, methylene blue is one of them, and their effects on both cognitive function and the gut microbiome. What they found was an interesting trend and trade-off. Methylene blue improved memory, it enhanced mitochondrial quality, and the way the brain was working through something called the NRF2 pathway. This basically strengthens your antioxidant systems at the cellular level. That's a meaningful benefit, but at the same time, methylene blue had a noticeable difference on decreasing gut microbiome diversity. But the part that really caught my attention was that the cognitive improvements actually correlated with specific bacterial species that were shifting, meaning that the gut-brain connection, again, is playing out here in real life. So just think about that maybe a different way. The compound that improved one end of the gut-brain axis simultaneously shifted the other end. And that's not a simple good or bad story. This is a systems question about how all of these things are so deeply connected. And that's exactly the type of conversation that gets missed when we stay at the level of the conversation of, does methylene blue help with brain fog? It's just not complex enough. The answer might be yes, superficially and published in the research, but the cost might be changes in your microbial environment that you won't notice immediately, but perhaps over time matters. That study's in the research summary if you want to check that out as well. Now, to also be very clear and transparent about something is that there are no current human clinical trials that evaluate methylene blue directly to the human gut microbiome, and it's set up that way from the beginning. That research hasn't been done yet, and that's important context, but we can still look at trends and patterns in other studies that give us clues in secondary measures. There was another systematic review published in 2018 that compiled data from multiple human studies using oral methylene blue for the treatment of malaria. Across those trials, GI symptoms like nausea and vomiting or abdominal discomfort were among the most consistently reported side effects, especially at the higher dosages. And this is perhaps giving us a clue into the shifts in the microbiome. And it's important to note that GI symptoms alone do not prove microbiome disruption, but they do tell us that the gut is responding in some way, whether inflammatory or microbiome shifts or similar. It's definitely registering the compound, and when you combine that with the clinical signal, with the antimicrobial properties that we discussed already that methylene blue has, and with the microbiome diversity data from some of the other studies, a pattern starts to form. So the question becomes, how much is the gut possibly affected by methylene blue, and at what dose does that effect start to matter, especially clinically? And right now, we just don't have a very precise answer to that. We have signals, we have clues, and we have a reasonable extrapolation of that data that we can then apply to the individual. If this kind of honesty and nuance is refreshing to you, that's actually the point of this channel. Please hit the like button if you're enjoying it. Help this message reach more of the right people. In part 3, we talked a little bit about the general threshold for 30 milligrams per day when it comes to oral dosing of methylene blue. Below that 30 milligram number, the significant microbiome disruption appears unlikely based on currently available data. But again, it's not black and white. And above that, the risk profile does seem to increase. But here's where I want to add a layer that I didn't go into in part 3. That threshold is based on an observable disruption. What it doesn't truly account for is some of the subtler changes, the shifts that researchers describe as within 1% in many research articles. In functional medicine, we do pay attention to and give weight to those signals when practiced fully, not because they're alarming or driving specific symptoms, but because over time, small shifts matter. Trends matter most, especially if someone is already dealing with some kind of a compromised gut function, whether we're talking absorption or the microbiome or digestive power. So the practical question becomes, if you're considering or are currently using methylene blue at a low dose and your gut is in good shape, the risk is probably quite low. But if you're experiencing dysbiosis or acid reflux or a system that is under pressure along the digestive tract, adding in an extra antimicrobial compound to an already stressed out microbial environment is a different proposition altogether than adding it to a more resilient digestive system. So where does this leave you if you're considering this? First, this is not meant to be an argument for or against methylene blue necessarily. The cognitive and mitochondrial benefits are very real and very well documented. This is an argument more for using it with your eyes open, understanding context, and a new layer of detail that maybe you haven't explored before. A second important piece is that dosing matters more than most people appreciate. If you haven't seen part 3, check that conversation out. And third, probably most important and a huge central theme to this channel, is that context matters. your baseline gut health, your microbial diversity, your immune integrity and inflammatory integrity in the gut. All of these factors combine into how well you might utilize methylene blue. Two people taking the same dose can have dramatically different gut environments and have dramatically different effects as well. And fourth is that if you're using methylene blue or even other supplements longer term, it's worth paying attention to these kinds of trends. Not to be fearful, again, but in an informed way, something that gives you a little more sense of the decision-making and empowerment in the process. This is what systems thinking looks like in practice. You can't evaluate a compound by looking at one system and its effects in isolation. The brain benefits are real, but the gut interactions are also likely real. Both of these things can coexist, and the quality of your decision depends on holding both at the same time in your individual context. And again, that principle does not just apply to methylene blue. It applies to almost every intervention that touches your biology. The question is never just, does it work? It's, what else is it doing? And does my system have the capacity to handle both sides of that equation? If you want to understand why the gut-brain connection matters more than most people realize, a good place to start is in this next video here, where I go over how gut health impacts your clarity and your performance and beyond. And this connects to everything that we've been unpacking in this series and what sometimes drives people to methylene blue in the first place. I'm Dr. Kenny, Root Cause Health Detective. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.